I ask unanimous consent at this point to enter into a colloquy with my friend, the senior senator from Iowa.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. Have you heard of a drug pricing proposal that is supported by both Democratic and Republican senators? The American Association of Retired Persons, the American Medical Association, the Federation of American Hospitals, America's health insurance plans, 76% of the American people, President Donald Trump, and the Department of Health and Human Services. What kind of idea can this be that has that kind of support, bipartisan support, in Congress as well as in the White House? Well, Senator Grassley and I have a simple amendment to the spending bill that is before us, which provides $1 million, small change by any federal standard, for the Health and Human Services Department to issue rules regarding price tags on direct-to-consumer ads for prescription drugs. While this underlying bill includes many important provisions that I support, it doesn't do anything to tackle prescription drug cost. And we know, American families know across the board, that it's time for us to act. If I ask you whether you've seen any commercials for prescription drugs on television, and you answer no, then I know one thing for sure: you don't own a television, because they broadcast an average of 9 drug ads that each of us see every single day. 9 a day. You know what I'm talking about. It's the ads with those unpronounceable names of the drugs, and then that long mumbling, don't take it if you're allergic to it, this may kill you, all the warnings that they give you at the end of the ad, over and over and over again. The pharmaceutical industry spends $6 billion a year so that we get a steady diet of these drug ads. How many countries in the world have television advertising for prescription drugs? 2, the United States of America and New Zealand. Each year, $6 billion is being spent for one purpose, so that finally, after watching an ad for the 45th time, you can spell Xarelto and walk into the doctor's office and ask if you can have Xarelto blood thinner rather than warfarin or some other version. The difference, of course, is that the Xarelto prescription drug costs $560 a month. And it may not be any better for you than the generic version that's a lot cheaper. You know what the #1 drug is that's advertised on television and sold in the United States of America? When I tell you, you'll nod yes. Here it is. Humira. Humira. It was designed to help people with rheumatoid arthritis, and that's a terrible disease. And people needed a helping hand. And then they discovered it had a positive impact on psoriasis. Well, psoriasis can be a terrible thing to suffer from, but there are a lot of us who just have a little red patch on our elbow who technically have psoriasis. So what I showed you here, you don't see on television, incidentally. How much does Humira cost? $5,500 a month. A month. You wonder why the cost of health care is spiraling out of control? $5,500 a month. And sadly, many of these high-priced prescription drugs are being prescribed by doctors when it's not necessary. And it drives up the cost of health care. It's why a major health insurance company in my state has told me they spend more money each year on high-cost prescription drugs than they spend on inpatient hospital care. Think about that. More money. And it's going through the roof, and there's nothing to contain it. So the senator from Iowa, with his Midwestern common sense approach to legislation, has joined with the senator from Illinois, who hopes to aspire to the same goal, to come up with a basic idea. If you're going to run a drug ad, put the price of the product on the ad. We'll know then what it really costs, and we'll also know when they start raising it again and again and again. Well, pharmaceutical industry hates this bill and this amendment like the devil hates holy water. They don't want to tell you what it's going to cost. They want you to go into that doctor's office and say, I just got to have Humira. There's this little patch on my elbow, and I absolutely got to have it. And too many doctors write those scripts. So what Senator Grassley and I are trying to do is to give the American people more information about drugs, and particularly their cost. We're trying to make sure that that information gives transparency to the transaction, and we're trying our very best to give the American consumers a break and perhaps start to slow down the cost of prescription drugs. This is a simple amendment, $1 million to the Department of HHS to issue rules requiring price tags on ads. One senator opposes us, one. We're trying our best to convince him not to oppose us. We think it's a good idea to move forward in this, and I yield the floor to my friend, my colleague, and my co-sponsor of this measure, Senator Chuck Grassley.
Madam President,
From Iowa.
I'm glad to join my friend in this effort because this fits into a lot of things we're trying to accomplish that Congress has done for decades, trying to give consumers information. Remember, maybe 40 years ago, I don't think it's 50 years ago, Congress passed legislation that you had to have a window sticker on cars of the cost of the cars. So consumers wouldn't be bannered back and forth between dealers not knowing what they were dealing with. Or you can't buy gas today without going to the filling station with a big sign knowing what it costs. And then even the pharmaceutical companies themselves want to educate consumers with these ads. And I've always supported the advertising of these pharmaceutical drugs, but they want to educate you not only about the value of their drugs, but down to the bottom, and then half the ad usually tells you if you take this drug, what the side effects are going to do, maybe implying that it is even life dangerous. That's a very important thing to educate the public about. So all we're trying to do here is have the consumer get the additional information that they need if they want to consider that drug, because everybody ought to want to consider the price, just like you consider the price of a car. Or I try to buy gas at the cheapest filling station I can, because it's just common sense, right? And so that's what Senator Durbin is pointing out. This is a Midwestern common sense approach to educating the consumers. They want you to buy their product, and then they kind of have some question about, could you really afford this? A lot of these ads even indicate to the consumer, well, maybe if you check with the company or check with somebody, you'll even get some help buying the drug. So the pharmaceutical companies are already interested in consumer education. We just want them to take it one step further. And part of it is because of the high cost of prescription drugs. So we have an opportunity now to do what we all talk about doing something about the cost of pharmaceutical drugs. And this is just a very small step in that direction, because it directs Health and Human Services to require drug companies to include the list price of these drugs in their TV ads. Now, the drug companies want you to know that there's a drug out there to help you. They want you to know the benefits of the drugs. So why don't they also want you to know about the price of the drug? That is simply, by not having that information out there, it's simply not a transparent way of doing business. Every other way you want to be transparent. We're just asking you to take one little small step and tell people what it's going to cost, like the price of gasoline, like the price of cars, or like you seem to be worried a little bit about the high cost of the drug, that maybe some people can't afford it and you might be criticized for that. You can get help. So, what we're up against here is a very powerful interest in this town, and it happens to be an interest that has made life better, longevity for people longer for their life. So we aren't here to find fault with the pharmaceutical companies. We're here to encourage the pharmaceutical companies to let the public know what they need. Now, you know, around here, it seems to me we're running up against the big pharmaceutical companies all the time. The CREATES Act came out of my committee 15-6. We can't seem to get that up. This amendment is being offered. We know who's fighting this amendment that Durbin-Grassley are sponsoring. It's the same companies. There's a scheme out there that they'll keep their patent drug on the market longer if they pay a generic company to keep their drug off the market. We call it pay for delay. The Durbin-Grassley bill doesn't get very far because of these interests. They don't like the fact that they ought to have some competition from the importation of drugs. They don't like it now that the FDA new director is moving in the direction of getting generics on the market a little bit sooner. But we aren't fighting those things now. What we're trying to do is pretty darn simple. Think of what's behind us now. How often do you get Senator Grassley and Senator Durbin cooperating on the same thing? Not too often. So that's something people ought to take into consideration. We have a very good chairman, very thorough chairman, Alexander of the Health Committee. He's backing this effort and has even had a colloquy on that point. We have Azar, the Secretary of HHS, says that this is a good thing to do. And maybe 2 months ago now, Trump and Azar had a news conference on the high cost of drugs and what they could do administratively to move that along. And just this very day, Azar is announcing some regulations going to OMB to move along some of those things that the president was talking about 2 months ago. And then everybody gets irritated about Trump's tweets. Do they do any good? Well, probably most of the time people don't think they do much good, but he tweeted at about the same time these big pharmaceutical companies announced on a whole bunch of their drugs that they were going to increase their prices 35 and 40%. And he tweeted how outrageous that was. A week later, one company said, we aren't going to go ahead. A week later, another company said they weren't going to go ahead. Now, whether all the companies have said that, I don't know. But what I'm trying to say here is you got Durbin-Grassley, you got Chairman Alexander, you got the Secretary of HHS, you got the President of the United States trying to do something about pharmaceuticals. And here, just a little simple amendment that we're trying to get on this bill. And we're running into this obstacle that you run into all the time when all we're trying to do is educate the consumer the same way the pharmaceutical companies want to educate the consumer. And by the way, 76% of the Americans in a poll support this. And I think Senator Durbin did better than I can about the interests, but I'll just kind of summarize. Doctors, hospitals, insurance companies, and the AARP support this amendment. So really, since it's so sensible, since it's right in line with what the pharmaceutical companies are trying to do with all their TV ads, educate the public, with what Congress has tried to do other times to educate the public, what we're trying to do through some of our education to have transparency in the prices that you pay when you go to the hospital, or what we're trying to do through health savings accounts, get the consumer involved, to do some shopping, to save the consumer money. That's what this is all about. It's so simple. I can't understand where common sense stuff, well, this isn't a town for common sense, I guess. But we ought to be able to get some of this common sense stuff done. So I want to thank Senator Durbin because he led this effort, and I'm glad to help him. Thank you for doing it. And let's get, we're going to get this done one way or the other. If we don't get it done on this bill, we're going to get it done because it's the right thing to do. And people, if you try long enough, if you're right, you eventually get something done in this town.
I thank my colleague from Iowa. Certainly patience is an important part of this job. But the American people are impatient. They want to know why they elect us to office and we don't solve problems. This is a problem Senator Grassley and I want to start solving. Informing American consumers about the actual cost of prescription drugs. What a radical idea. The first time you really realize what a drug costs is when you're standing right in front of that cash register with your mouth dropped wide open saying, "You gotta be kidding me." Instead, people ought to know going into this conversation what these drugs cost. That's not an unreasonable request. And as Senator Grassley said, we do it for cars, we do it for gas, we do it for so many things. Why wouldn't we do it for this? The American people get it, they want us to get it, and I hope we can convince that one senator who's holding us up to give us a chance to inform the American people on a bipartisan basis of something that'll help in a small way perhaps, but help to bring down the cost of health care in this country. I thank the senator from Iowa for joining me on the floor today, and I yield the floor.